Okay, here is an example of a mature forest. In the ecological succession of things, we have the overstory. That's the tallest layer, and it creates kind of an umbrella, a canopy layer. And then under that, you're going to have the understory. That's trees that are growing underneath, and that's a natural occurring phenomenon of the mature forest. You'll have some that'll just reach up way tall, and then you'll have another canopy, an understory underneath that. And then next you'll have a vining layer. That's all the vines that are growing. That could be muscadines, that could be lots of things. Then you have a shrub layer. That shrub layer could be blackberries, it could be blueberries, it could be currants, but that's the woody lower layer. Then you have an herbaceous layer, and that would be smaller plants like herbs and tomatoes and peppers. Then you have the ground cover layer. And I don't see any here because this is a pretty mature forest, but along the edges you'll see it even more, where you'll have strawberries, you could have oregano, you could have things that cover the ground, and then you have the mulch. The mulch is the leaves that naturally fall from the trees. And it looks pretty thin right here, but if I were to guess, I would say that if you dig down, this has been going on for many, many years, this soil right here is actually decomposed leaves and things that have fallen to the ground. Then you will have stuff like this deadfall, a tree that falls down to the ground, or branches or limbs that fall down to the ground, and when they fall, they'll sit there and they'll just decay. The microorganisms will start to work on it, it'll turn spongy, it'll hold a lot of nutrients, and eventually it'll just turn back into this right here. And it feeds the forest floor. You can still see some signs of mycorrhizal fungi here, which is essential. It's what we need. That's actually a root, but you can see the color. Then there's the root layer. The root layer is going to have things in it that are going to come up naturally. One of the things that I also want to point out about the forest is you will have things that are self-seeders, like pecans. So they will fall to the ground, and then they will, now this one right here is probably one that fell from an upper layer, and because I don't see a tree next to it that looks like this one, so it's probably a berry. Here's another example. This looks like a pecan tree right here. So pecan somehow made it over here. I don't see any pecans over it. Maybe a squirrel buried it here. And that brings me to another very important layer of the forest, is the wildlife. So a bird eats a seed, it drops the seed, a bear eats a seed, eats berries, drops the seed, and then it just sits in the soil until it decides to grow up into another tree, shrub, vine, root, herbaceous layer. So even if something's not perennial, that means it comes back year after year, it still can propagate itself, meaning produce another plant, and it will start growing here, even if it only lives for one season. Now, when we talk about the importance of the different layers, I'm walking up to an edge and it's all very grassy. This grass is as tall as I am. And this is in a big open area. But then when we get closer, we can see that since the leaves have been dropping from these trees for years and years and years, falling to the ground, it just stops. Nobody has mowed this. We come into a clearance area and I'm able to walk. I'm no longer in the grass, but it is, turn around, and that's where the grass starts up again. So this is a little clearing, a little savanna, I don't know, prairie, where you have grasses. And then it just goes to here, where all this mulch has been dropping from the leaves of the trees. So leaves will do just as good of a job, maybe even the best job. Deadfall, things like that, but it's covering the ground. Okay, so that was the mature forest. That's the first step in ecological succession. The reason I say it's the first step is because when you go to the next step is disturbance. How can you disturb something that was never there? So the next step is disturbance, and this is where we start as gardeners. We start with bare soil. We plant herbaceous plants in it like tomatoes and peppers and squash and pumpkins and things like that. And what you'll have here is just an area where all the microorganisms have been disturbed, the roots have been disturbed, and then we go to succession is where you have this. You have a lot of weeds growing up in a natural forest system. So Mother Nature does not like bare soil. It will put something there just to keep it from eroding. If we didn't do that, then the sand or the soils would blow away, they would wash away. In a situation, it could be mass deforestation from a volcano, or it could be a flood, or it could be a tornado or a hurricane. But in this situation, like I said, we did take it down with some heavy equipment. So this early succession is extremely important. Most of these plants are going to send down very long tap roots. And the tap roots are going to break up the soil to prevent compaction. And then it's going to cover the ground. That's its most important job, is to cover the ground to keep it from eroding. And then we go to mid-succession, which is a lot more complex. Mid-succession usually happens around the edges. So these weeds will grow up and they'll get tall. And then around the edge here, we'll see a lot of grasses starting to form. Grasses should be putting down feet of roots, not inches. And it's going to allow for whatever the survival of the fittest, you've heard that, is the strongest, and it'll start to grow. But it's a lot more complex because, like I said, you have the edges, and along the edges, that's where you'll see a lot of the vines make it difficult to get through. That's where you'll see a lot of poison ivy, a lot of Virginia creeper. But in the edges, you'll start to see more herbaceous layers and shrub layers. So we carved out a path that goes down here, but we're still getting a lot of leaves falling here. So our weed problem is not too bad here. And then we come back into a mature forest. This is a different area. We do have some deadfall, almost tripped on, which that's good. That's what's expected. But we will be able to walk freely through this area because there's so much mulch on the floor of the forest that there's not much impeding my way here. Now when you think permaculture, think permanent culture. This little forest has been here for I don't know how many years, but a lot. Many years. With its tall layer, its understory layer, its shrub layer, its vine layer, its ground cover, its root layer. And nobody's done anything to take care of it. So it's the science behind mimicking nature letting the forest be the teacher. And now just imagine that that is an apple tree, or a fig tree, or a cherry tree, a pistachio tree, an almond tree, an avocado tree. I've seen trees of those genus and species that big before. Now imagine that those vines are grapes, excuse me, or hops, or passion fruit, something that will grow in a vine trellis-like setting. Now, in our mini food forests, you might not want to put a vining plant on a new tree, but I would just put it on some other sort of trellis, a fence. It could be one that you buy from the store or that you make. Then again, that shrub layer, which I'm not in that part of the forest right now, but the shrub layer could be blackberries, blueberries, raspberries. And then you have the ground cover layer, which could be mulch. This could be strawberries. It could be oregano. It could be thyme. We have the herbaceous layer, which could be your peppers, tomatoes, squash. Squash and melons and pumpkins and things, though, those are very good ground cover because they have such big leaves. They shade out all of the weed seeds. And then our root layer could be carrots, potatoes, daffodils. And I want to just say one more thing that is very important, and that is the flowering layer. Those bring in the pollinators that are going to pollinate everything. Now, doing a succession garden or guild establishment gardens, all of these species are pioneers that are coming in to settle the area, if you think about it that way. So this is going to cover the ground, it's going to protect the soil, it's going to keep weeds from growing up, and then you're going to have things like this. These actually pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere, down into the leaves, down into the plant, down into the roots, and it puts it here into the ground. And then when it doesn't need it anymore, say the plant becomes disturbed, say it's cut down, it loses its leaves, then it releases that oxygen or that nitrogen into the ground. And then it feeds the plant that's next to it. Clover will do the same thing. Okay, I am out on the edge of the woods, actually in my yard, and this is a bed where I have planted the rosemary that you all gave me. Y'all started this from seeds. Isn't that awesome? So this rosemary is another example that prevents predation, and the deer don't really like to eat it. So that's something else I could grow back there or in another area if I'm concerned about the deer eating it. And I have a whole list of plants that I can get for you guys. But in this forest garden, you can see other examples of pioneering species. That there's some salvia that just started growing on its own, and the deer won't eat that. I have used this trellis that we made for beans to grow up, or sweet peas. There was a whole lot of stuff in here before, and I pulled it out already. We had potatoes growing in here. But I'm mimicking the forest. I'm letting the forest be the teacher here. And this bed is planted underneath some overstory or a canopy layer. So it's giving some protection. The potatoes don't like having the beat down of the Texas sun and the heat. So I planted those here. So I'm doing my best to try to mimic what the forest does naturally. All right, planty people, grow well.